Record. Awesome. Well, before we all begin, I don't have any huge announcements. What about you though, Sean?
Yeah, I'm sure I'll talk about a couple things while we're chatting about AI stuff, but there's been no new developments or anything I think I have to announce.
Awesome. Well then, yeah, let's go ahead and kick it off. So today, just hoping to have a discussion, kind of open discussion. We'll see where the road leads us on AI and PyHC. I know Sean, you had a couple of things to kind of hopefully stoke the fire on some chats.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I'll say we might not spend the whole hours doing this if we don't have an hour to fill. Um, oh, hey, do people hear the intercom announcement that's happening right now, or did my noise cancellation totally block that out?
Didn't hear anything.
Okay, great. I got like a loudspeaker that blasts some stuff in Spanish next to me every once in a while, but thank you, AirPods. A little. Oh, so one of the things we wanted to talk about today was potential AI usage policies. I might share my screen here in a second to give us something to look at. Um, like people like SunPy have been adopting AI usage um, documents that are largely copied from other broader community things. Nick even shared a link in the general channel of our Slack to just a bunch. It was some kind of repo that just kind of cataloged a bunch of the different AI usage policies that different projects are using. We might take a look at those. I'd be curious to hear people's thoughts on if we should have one in PyHC, but also more just pointedly, I've been doing a few things that actually might even go against or push up against what might be considered normal or good usage of AI. And I want to know people's opinions on if it's worth it or things like that. So that's maybe kind of the introduction. Let me see how to lead here first. Yeah, I'll go ahead and share the screen. I'll just share the whole desktop, scroll through a bunch of things. Hopefully, we're looking at my Chrome browser now. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, sweet. So, this first tab that I have open here is just SunPy's AI usage document. And one of the things that I really like about this is it can basically be boiled down into one sentence, which is bolded here, that any contribution should be worth more to the project than the effort required to review it. And I like that because, obviously it's pretty easy now to just generate a bunch of slop with any old tool and think you've solved some problem or created some feature, and you could be opening 100 pull requests on different projects. And in fact, many of them are experiencing exactly that, where they're getting these huge influxes of pull requests and things. And it's low quality code or it's not thought out and everything. And in some cases, you do spend a lot of time as a maintainer of the package reviewing something that you end up deciding is kind of crappy. But if you have spent a day or two trying to get your head wrapped around something that someone kind of just hucked over the fence, that's wasting your time and not doing anything valuable. So, in general, I would say I support this idea for PyHC. You know, I don't discourage the use of using AI for the work or even to do significant things with the community. Um, but that kind of leads me a little bit into kind of the first example of a thing that I've done recently where I feel like I accomplished something that was pretty important, but I am not sure if the effort to review it is worth the contribution. And I'll want some feedback on a couple people, especially if you're familiar with this. But this tab over here is a pull request I opened for Komodo just a few weeks ago. It is essentially trying to fix Komodo's pip install. It's been a thing for a while that because Komodo doesn't wrap, sorry, because Komodo does wrap C and Fortran stuff, and it wasn't building wheels with the pip install. When you would just try to pip install Komodo core, it was an old, outdated thing that was missing the language stuff. Anyway, I spent some time with John Niehoff from SpacePy because SpacePy has solved this problem for themselves a long time ago, where they basically just build wheels that are Python version independent, and they just stick the shared library files basically inside the wheels at build time, so that pip install just works, so to say. And me and him sat down for a day, and we made a version one of this, mostly using like Claude Code and Codex by kind of showing it SpacePy's backend and saying, here, examine how they handled their dependencies with C and Fortran stuff and explain how that's different than what Komodo is doing. And through a lot of work, we ended up with this giant PR that has, you know, I could keep scrolling through a while. I think there was 24 files that are changed. And it's a bunch of build things that completely rewrite it. I I admit that I haven't gotten my head fully wrapped around it, but I've done the testing to show that in CI we are testing on Mac, Ubuntu, and Windows, and I've just got little tests that pip install the package and see if the wheels had what you were expecting. Seems to be working. Is the code completely high quality? I'm not 100% sure. Has it built directly after SpacePy, and have there been multiple Reddit exactly how SpacePy does it? Um, but maybe I'll open the question to the floor right now and just see if a couple people think that even just taking this kind of approach, is this useful or burdensome? Let's discuss that for a second.
Well, I would say it's useful because these type, having done several of these kind of interfaces for different Python packages, it's time consuming, very time consuming. And so, yeah, I guess it's a matter of the question. So this is just my opinion of whether it's useful or not is, just related obviously to the accuracy of the AI. And so if you have a passing tests and things, it may be my my thought would be, have like a release candidate or, version plus one or whatever, have people try it, be sure it didn't introduce bugs. But that's just one approach, probably not very foolproof.
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate those thoughts. You know, I am always careful to be, using the latest frontier models that are available, and I pay for some higher tier subscriptions to Claude and Codex and things. So I think this was even redone with like Opus 4.6 and Codex 5.3, just because they were slightly better than the 4.5 and the 5.2 that we did the first version of this with. So I'm reasonably convinced that the code quality is good and everything. But yes, it kind of just opens the question, because now almost anybody in PyHC who has access to these kind of tools can do really big things like, hey, completely gut a package and refactor it like this other one. And I don't know. I guess
Yeah,
I'm trying to get a sense for how scared people are of those approaches, or if we're
well,
not.
like I say, my position is I have packages that haven't been updated. They're using F to Pi, and it's like it's so much work to do the C type thing, which is, as the spacebar project has shown, is perhaps the direction of the future, or the direction, not the, or the present, the direction to go. And it would just be too time consuming for me right now, being unfunded to do that. So I don't know. I guess, like I say, I'm biased with the interest. So yeah,
Mhm. And that does bring up an important point too. Maybe, well, maybe important is not the right word, but something I've been thinking about a lot is I like this kind of I like helping people. Like, for a long time, PyHC has been kind of developing standards, and I feel like often giving package maintainers extra work to do, like, hey, add more stuff to your package to meet this new standard, or beef up your documentation, or have better tests and things. And I want to start getting into like a contributor role where I'm identifying pain points that packages have, like putting things on pip with different languages, for example, and seeing if I can go in there and help people and offer with pull requests and that kind of stuff. Um, I'm only recently able to start doing that better because I have tools that can explain code bases to me and stuff like that. Um,
And sometimes
any,
the AI tools fall flat, but often, more often than not, they at least are quite directionally correct. They're directionally correct a really high percent of the time. I don't know, 80 plus percent in my work. And okay, maybe
yeah.
not implementation correct is maybe more like 50 or 60%, but the directional correctness to me is important
Mhm.
because that it's like a prototype that I can then say, okay, this is worth doing, and I can do this myself. I'll learn how to do it correctly and finish the job.
Absolutely. Um, Anybody else have thoughts to chime in here?
Well, Sean, I think it's important that you supplied your own tests and sort of did some due diligence on your own rather than, pushing it to the project maintainers. And that, that plays into that balance you mentioned of, is the contribution worth the effort to validate it? And I
Mhm.
also like I'd be way more suspicious of a PR that like pulled in additional packages that I might have to vet for, security issues or size or, ease of installation. And so I don't know exactly what you did. It seems like you probably didn't need to pull in much additional tooling to do this, but I think that's another consideration we should be thinking about.
Yeah. And, I scrolled through the long PR description a little bit to show that I did take the time to try to list actually be exhaustive of like this thing explains everything that was changed essentially, even down to having like a table of what changed in each of the files, even though that's overkill. And this is just one example of a thing just to guide discussion. But as I'm looking here through the participant list, I actually see that we do have Darren on the call. So Darren, if I'm able to call you out for a second, because I think this PR was directly to you. Do you have any opinions on it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely do appreciate this. Right now is I've had very little time to work on Komodo in the last few weeks. Um, so
Mhm.
this is something that I am hoping to get into and then and evaluate it because yeah, like you say, it needs to be evaluated and tested, but it definitely is a helpful step in like you say, if it's 90% of the way there, that's still a big help. And I appreciate that those types of contributions. Absolutely.
Well, good. I'm really glad to hear that. Yes, and no rush. We talked on GitHub and stuff about this before, and um, I knew you were going to be doing other stuff for lots of weeks before here. Um, but yeah, it goes back to me wanting to contribute, and trying to find solutions to problems, and I felt good doing it.
Yeah, no, it definitely is appreciated. And I will be getting to it eventually here. So
Yeah. So maybe that's just one example of like a Pandora's box we're opening a little bit with having the ability to tackle big problems with AI tools. Not to beat a dead horse, I might look at a different example of maybe I'll just cover a success story that doesn't really need any opinions unless anyone has any on it. But something I did create pretty recently is these PyHC GitHub actions in the PyHC actions repo. And they're basically just GitHub Actions to check for FEP3 compliance and for PyHC environment compatibility. So you can, where was my example? I think I have to refresh it to get the new README. I haven't looked at this in a while. Here it is. Yep. Anyone now can put this workflow in a repo of their choosing, and it will check, right now this example would set it up to be on push, pull request, and a cron schedule, but let you know if any of the dependencies in your project violate FEP3 compliance, or it will also go take a look at the current Python environment for the PyHC environment and try to basically install your package into it and let you know if there's a dependency conflict. And they're simple things on paper, but you might be amazed at how many thousands of lines of code are inside this repository just to make that happen. And this is something where I fully just like went pure architecture reviewer tester role for creating this. And I probably haven't read more than 10% of the thousands of lines of code in this thing, but I have tons of um, tests. There are unit tests for the work itself, and I've been opening pull requests in the core packages, and they've been using it and everything. And so far, it all seems to be working great. So here's an example of kind of big-ish infrastructure stuff that I'm building out and just trusting to see it work. That's an interesting point that doesn't need a lot of discussion, but worth throwing out there. And then the heliophysics software search interface was the other thing I was going to bring up. Is now people have seen this quite a bit because we've been talking about it at telecons and all of that. I think actually a fair amount of you, even on this call, have taken the time to go to this submit a resource page and submit at least one of your packages to the website. But this is a use case that I've identified for AI because this form is onerous. It's got 33 fields. It regularly takes me 20 to 30 minutes just to paste information from a pre-filled form into this thing. So I can imagine if you're filling it out from scratch for the first time, it can be an hour or two of your time. And I think largely because of how much work that is, we weren't getting very many submissions to the website at first. So what I had been working on since maybe third quarter of last year has been making little agents to do a lot of the populating work for the website. I've got two different repos over here, HSSI Claude agents and Codex agents, which are essentially the same thing, but one's meant for OpenAI's Codex and one is for Claude Code. But it uses a combination of like skills and sub-agents and things to extract metadata, validate it, and submit it. So we can now give essentially any software repository to one of these tools, and it will go through and extract exactly the information you need to fill out these exact forms. So the software functionality was particularly tricky to get right, but important because that's what actually lets you do filtering functionality on what does the software actually do and help you find the software you're looking for. That's the extraction part of it. The validation part is just taking a look at metadata that was extracted from a repo, and then a sub agent with like an adversarial skeptical personality will look at it and assume every single thing is wrong and then try to go back into the repo and prove to itself that, okay, no, actually this metadata is in fact correct. And so once it's been extracted and validated, then we have a way to submit it too. And this is kind of my bulk submission solution for how to get packages into here. I think I'm maybe 20 PyHC packages away from having at least the 92 official PyHC packages in the website. We're aiming to have more than just Python code displayed here in the website, so there will be lots of work to do after that. But there's an example of I have to admit there's a chance that there's some hallucinated information that leaks through this process and makes it into the website. I do my due diligence to only use the latest models and to do all those reviewing steps and to check things myself as I'm doing the submissions, not 100%, but to some reasonable standard to try to prove to myself that it's right. But does anyone see a problem with that? Or does anyone feel that that's dubious enough use of a tool that we should maybe be making that more clear on the website? How about I'll open that up to the floor for a minute.
So you're saying you used AI to quickly populate this and you're worried about hallucinations? Is that the question to the group here?
Really, it's more like I guess I'm saying that I'm not so worried about hallucinations because I'm only using tools that I trust, and I think I've added enough validation in here to be reasonably correct. But does that seem like a red flag to anybody? I guess is more the question.
I suppose the best way would be just send out an email to each of the package maintainers saying, hey, here's your entry. I think it's accurate. Check it. Because whether it's AI or human, there might always be errors.
Yeah, I actually forgot to mention that because I totally did do exactly that.
Oh,
Um,
yay.
I have not gotten many emails back, maybe surprisingly or unsurprisingly, but yes, every time I've submitted one of these packages, I will take the contact person for the package and email them both the submission and the submission edit link that the website generates. And I say, hey, look, I just submitted your package to my website. I think I did a good enough job, but you're the expert. Please check it. Some people, maybe on the order of 5 to 10, have emailed back saying, hey, thank you very much. And that information looked great. I maybe tweaked the description or something. But I've mostly gotten good feedback or silence.
When did you send these?
It's been off and on. I've been doing this since mid last year.
Now I'm
Because,
checking my packages in there, and if I got the email and ignored you, in which case I apologize. But if I didn't get the email, then I chide. So I don't know. Apologize or chide. It's a tough call.
yeah, one of the two. Did anybody on the call get an email from me saying I had submitted your package? And did you go take a look at it? If so, possibly not. I'll let some silence go for a second, give people a chance to check and think about it. Hearing silence, probably the answer is no. That's okay. Maybe just while we're on the topic, the other thing I can bring up, will this find it quickly if I go here? Eh, not quickly, but close enough. Oh, if this will just be more of an advertisement. I'll say if people want to check out the version of PyHC chat that I've been using to do a lot of this stuff, I will paste it here in the Zoom chat. Um, we could be going a step closer towards deploying this with, if we had funding, I could make actual like website scripts out of this and post this as a chatbot on the website and stuff like that. But barring funding and actually not that much request for use so far, I'm keeping this a command line tool, and it's just right now meant to work with Claude Code, Codex, or Gemini CLI. But this is a thing where if anyone wants to open it up, I've basically put the PyHC packages as submodules inside the thing, along with various resources and tools like those HSSI agents, our website, summer school materials, things like this. So I think this is a very exciting use and basically the killer app of AI for me for PyHC in a lot of ways because as tech lead, I was tasked with kind of understanding and helping coordinate development of almost 100 packages whose software I'm not very familiar with, and in an area of heliophysics that I'm not necessarily always going to be a subject matter expert in. And through here, I think I've baked in enough instructions just inside the general, starting markdown files of here's what PyHC is all about. Here's where to look and what repositories to find what kinds of information and how to go about doing this. When doing things like how to refactor a package based off another one, or even asking simple things like what's the Zoom Telecon link for PyHC Telecons again. This is a great chat and development interface that I'll recommend people use if you are so inclined. I would really love to actually start getting some users of this and some feedback to start being able to make the case to Brian, etc., who hold the purse to get us some credits and funding to just stick it on the website as a free tool to talk to.
How large is the how big is what is needed for it if you would run it locally in gigabytes?
Oh, like when you very first clone this thing, it's got to mention here you do like a recursive git clone because it's really only helpful if you've cloned in all the different packages and everything like that too. Roughly several gigabytes is all I've written on the README right now. I forget how much it is, but it was less than 10-ish, I think.
And yeah, the context we have is if you have Jupyter notebooks and use the Jupyter AI plugin, it doesn't currently allow web search, so you have to put everything locally. So we're looking to put this locally on Helio Cloud so people can do your chatbot within a notebook.
Oh yeah, that's right. You had someone working on that, didn't you, Sandy? We've been
So,
talking on Slack a little bit.
Yeah, Lisa
so
Knoll. Yep.
I'm
Oh, is
here.
that Lisa?
Yeah, I wanted to see what you've been up to lately.
Yeah, well, this is what I've been up to lately as far as that goes. We were I don't need to put you on the spot for the telecon if you don't want to be, but has there been any progress on that project?
Um, a little. So when I first slacked you, or when Sandy slacked you, and then pulled me into the conversation, I was sort of like a AI toddler. So still sort of here. I can turn on my video. Still sort of learning how to use AI. Oh, it's connected to my MacBook video, which is on the here. Okay, there we go. Still sort of
I,
learning how to use. Still learning how to use AI. Getting my bearings with it. So you had said that you were using, RAG, and then you settled on this method, which I think we've seen a bunch of APL now, and it's sort of like project plus GPT is like what people do now is what I've
yeah,
determined is they kind of make that agents file, um, and they attach it to whatever service is provided to them by their employer or that they pay for, and it just sort of plug and play. It just works. It's great. Um, but when you're so for Jupyter AI, you call a model, but it's just a model into the notebook, into Jupyter Lab, and it's not any of the cool agentic, orchestration layers on top of it. Um,
yeah,
so you can't pull a PyHC, you can't pull the PyHC chatbot in, but you could develop something that you could create an agent layer, ideally, just on those packages, that chunk. So I think it was about 3 GB because I keep having to we keep having to think about size of things, and I keep having to look at how big
yeah.
that repo is. Um, but So that's sort of what I've been working on, is seeing if I can build something that will be, that PyHC chatbot, but without the cool, um, like all the cool web search layers and all the embedding that's already built in and stuff. Um,
Yeah, that would be really exciting. I know that Jupyter AI plugin that Jupyter themselves made, they did that pretty early. I think they released it almost a year, even 2 years ago at this point. And it was just a drop-in chatbot thing, kind of nothing extra. And it's a little bit of a shame they haven't kept beefing it up more and more as like the tools are getting more complex. But hey, if
yeah,
Helio Cloud rolls their own solution and makes something awesome, that could be a contribution to the field.
hell yeah. Yeah, so I think they're moving on to version 3. It's in beta right now, but it doesn't seem like it's that big of an improvement. But that's fine. We can work within the bounds, I think. Plus, this is a really good problem. This ends up being a transferable problem. At APL we deal with ITAR and CUI stuff, and this ends up being a solution because we can't use these cool bots. We can't use Claude and Codex for these things because they're not CUI approved. So, how do you
Yeah.
build your own orchestration layer? Yeah, that isn't going to share state secrets or whatever. You know, uh, so it's ended up being kind of a universal problem. So anyway,
It sure is.
I've promised to keep Sean on the loop about this. Nothing. I haven't really done anything very groundbreaking so far. So that's as soon as something cool happens, I'll
We'll be
share
the
it.
first to know. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, LASP is navigating the same kind of problems with CUI information.
Hmm.
Basically, no NASA data, no NASA information can ever make it to any of these chatbots, that kind of stuff. Luckily for us in PyHC, pretty much everything we do is open source and open science. So it's fair game for a lot of what we do, which kind of opens the floodgates for doing things like this. But not everyone has that luxury.
Right. Yeah. No. It's Yeah. Well. Yeah. You're towing a line in this space. So yeah.
Yeah. I kind of actually want. hmm, It's a little bit of a non sequitur, but I'm curious to get a feel for everyone on the call. If your projects are using AI or if you're being blocked basically by these kinds of like export control rules, do I want to ask people to use the raised hands feature or do I want to ask people to put things in the chat? Um,
Why not
how
both?
about why not? But I'll start with raise your hands. Can I actually start with the question of raise your hand on Zoom if you would be using some kind of fancy AI chatbot for your own package or work, but you are being blocked because the export control rules just don't allow it. Maybe nobody? That would actually be a promising sign if we're all just flatly in open science land and not having to worry about this.
Oh no, that's not the reason. I just have no desire to use AI.
That's another one too. Yep. Just not use it because you don't want to. So that's the answer there. Maybe then I'll ask, raise your hand if your project has developed or is wanting to start adopting some kind of like an AI usage policy similar to what SunPy has done over here. Got at least one.
For us lazy people, can you put that URL in the chat? Because I think most packages should probably just put in an AI policy in anticipation of future contributions.
Yep, dropped in the chat. Yeah, I'm getting a sense that I mean we're still in early days for this kind of stuff, and having usage policies are just now kind of entering the conversation. So I guess a lot of this telecon was just starting to gauge the room a little bit and see what people are thinking about the topic.
Yeah. So worth having some similar language on AI usage, such as what we see here with SunPy on the PyHC main website itself. I know doing a whole FEP would be a little bit overkill, but pointing to this at least might be useful.
Yeah, I like at least having something like this that just says in simple terms like the contribution worth more than effort to review it. And, and just having some intelligent blatantly do like please don't use the free version of ChatGPT to solve a universal heliophysics downloader in one prompt and then give it to us like look at this amazing thing I did. That might be something I'd take a stab at in the next couple weeks. It would just be maybe even it could be a simple blog post or something like that on PyHC to start with, just to get the conversation going. And it might not go anywhere for a while, but
Yeah,
that's
I'm
kind of
open.
what I'm thinking. Well, cool. I've made it through the list of topics I wanted to share or get feedback on. With 20 minutes left, is there anything on this topic? I mean, it's a hot button topic. Is there anything anyone wanted to bring to the floor to talk about? I'll give a little bit of uncomfortable silence to let anybody get
Yeah,
brave
no, this
if
is
they
a
want
little bit
to.
of a side comment, just relevant to the meeting, though. One thing I've found useful in more than one of the other groups I'm in, is using the AI companion in Zoom. Although maybe that's a hot button topic, but it is nice for making summaries. But that's just a side comment.
Yeah, we have that disabled right now, don't we, Julie? We don't get AI generated summaries.
Not at the moment, no.
Nope. I know LASP had disabled that at one point universally. I forget if they turned it back on by default for LASP accounts.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that one.
Hmm. Yeah, there was a little while back when like Whisper and voice transcriptions first became a thing that you and I were kind of manually feeding um, Zoom transcriptions and to get like try to generate summary notes, and then if it eventually just became like an actual feature of Zoom, and we stopped doing that, and we weren't looking at them, and no one else was looking at them anyway. So I think we're just not.
Yeah, pretty much. It was just a not so much usage, but
Mhm. I have found it to be useful sometimes.
I mean, we could explore doing that again and then where to store those, where it would make sense.
Yeah. One thing I actually am doing, I can go ahead and mention now that I'm planning on doing this. I have a to do in the PyHC chat repo right now for supporting telecons and summer schools through YouTube support, basically. Um, it only works with Gemini right now because OpenAI and Claude don't have any YouTube scraping tools. But I've been thinking for a while that I need to try out the Gemini toggle for it, and I want to bake in knowledge of our telecons and our YouTube to PyHC chat. So you could just ask things like, what was discussed at the last Telecon? Or what will be discussed at the upcoming one? Or like, give me a summary of the themes that have been covered for all of 2025 across that I can see that kind of information being useful to surface. And you might not need to even be transcribing or taking meeting notes on the Zoom to get that kind of stuff if it can do a good enough job of summarizing and chunking YouTube recordings. But I need to test that. Thumbs up. Anybody else? I don't want to mention that if no one says anything that we will just end this early, but ending early is an option if no one has anything else that they would like to discuss with the group.
That is an option.
Yeah. But we're here for you guys, and I kind of enjoyed discussing these things. I could sit here for as long as anyone wants.
Meetings should run as long as they are useful and no longer.
You're all right about that. All right.
Cool. I'll call that good enough. I
Yeah.
think we've spent it.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
All
This
right.
was great.
Yeah, happy to give us some more space in the future to talk about it more as things develop. So we'll have another Telecon 2 weeks, same time, same place. And I believe Nick, you're going to be giving another tutorial at the next one.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, more details on that to come. Get excited. And yeah, we'll chat later.
And thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.